If you thought a crisis thousands of miles away could never affect your US visa plans, 2026 is proving otherwise. Right now, two major forces, a geopolitical crisis in the Strait of Hormuz and a major US immigration policy shift, are colliding to create one of the most complex environments visa applicants have faced in years. Two major things are happening at the exact same time, and together, they are creating one of the most complicated immigration environments that applicants from Pakistan, South Asia, and the Middle East have ever faced. The first is a military and economic crisis centered on one of the most important waterways on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz. The second is a sweeping U.S. immigration policy change that quietly went into effect in January of this year, and that directly affects people from Pakistan and 74 other countries. Neither of these things, on their own, cancels your visa. But together, they are creating delays, disruptions, uncertainty, and real consequences for real families right now. So today, we are going to break down exactly what is happening, what is confirmed fact, and what it actually means for your situation. Whether you are applying for a green card, sponsoring a family member, waiting on a work visa, or just trying to plan travel to the United States in 2026. Let's start with the Strait of Hormuz. Because before we can talk about what it means for immigration, you need to understand what it is and why the whole world is watching it right now. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow body of water, just about 21 miles wide at its tightest point, sitting between Iran and the coast of Oman. On a map, it looks almost insignificant, but what flows through it is anything but insignificant. Approximately 20% of the world's crude oil and liquefied natural gas supplies pass through the Strait of Hormuz, 20%. 1 in every 5 barrels of oil that powers the global economy moves through this one narrow stretch of water. That means every time there is tension there, every time ships slow down, reroute, or stop, the entire world feels it at the gas pump, at the grocery store, in airline ticket prices, and in the broader economy. Since late February 2026, following joint military strikes by the United States and Israel on Iran, the Strait has experienced severe geopolitical and economic disruption. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued warnings restricting vessel passage through the strait, leading to major disruptions and restricted shipping traffic. This is not a small regional skirmish. This is a direct confrontation between two of the most powerful military forces in the world, and it is playing out on a waterway that the global economy depends on. The strait is a key waterway not just for oil and natural gas, but also for other commodities including helium, fertilizers, and industrial products that factories and farms around the world depend on. A prolonged disruption of Middle East oil trade would create oil market conditions for which there is no historical precedent. That is not a dramatic statement. That is the assessment of the Congressional Research Service, which produced a formal report to Congress on this exact situation in March 2026. Now, what has actually happened since the crisis began? International benchmark oil prices jumped 8% within just 2 trading days after military operations began, and they kept climbing from there. Despite statements that the disrupted strait doesn't significantly affect the United States directly, average U.S. gas prices spiked more than 30% within a single month, surpassing $4 per gallon for the first time in years. And if gas prices in America jumped that sharply, imagine what it means for countries that are far more dependent on imported energy. Airline fuel costs go up, freight costs go up, everything connected to global shipping becomes more expensive and more uncertain. Natural gas prices in Asia and Europe rose by extraordinary margins in the days immediately following the start of military operations. That is not a small adjustment. That is an economic earthquake felt across 2 continents. The disruption has also interrupted the export of large amounts of petrochemicals, fertilizer, and raw materials used in manufacturing around the world. Now, how is this being managed right now? On March 26th, Iran's foreign minister announced that ships owned by 5 nations, China, Russia, India, Iraq, and Pakistan, would be allowed to transit the Strait of Hormuz. Malaysia and Thailand later secured access after diplomatic talks. Iran also agreed to a United Nations request to allow humanitarian and fertilizer shipments through the strait. So the strait is not completely shut to everyone. There are selective, negotiated access arrangements in place, but for the United States and its close allies, the situation remains tense and contested. Iran and Oman are also drafting a protocol to monitor transit through the strait, a development that has offered some hope that the waterway may reopen in a more structured way without requiring further military force. But as of early April 2026, the war has entered its sixth week, with active fighting continuing and no ceasefire agreement in place. Now, here is the piece that connects all of this to your U.S. visa application. When there is active military conflict in a region, and when the security situation is changing day by day, U.S. embassies and consulates in that region do not operate normally. They cannot. Rising tensions in the Middle East have caused immediate disruptions to visa processing and international travel across the region. Several U.S. embassies in the region have temporarily reduced or limited visa services due to security concerns. The situation has been described as fluid and evolving on a daily basis. Airspace closures were reported in Iran, Israel, Kuwait, UAE, Bahrain, Iraq, and Qatar. Widespread airline flight suspensions followed. Reports of land border closures emerged, along with shelter-in-place advisories across multiple countries. And this is critically important for anyone who was planning a visa interview, or expecting a passport return, or counting on a specific consulate to process their case. Multiple U.S. embassies and consulates in the region canceled or significantly reduced routine visa appointments as security conditions deteriorated. The State Department shifted its focus to assisting U.S. citizens in the region, which is standard practice when war or emergencies occur. Routine consular processes are paused to allow all resources to be focused on Americans abroad. Here's how the priority system inside a U.S. consulate actually works, because understanding this will help you understand why your visa appointment ended up being the last thing on anyone's mind during a crisis. Consular affairs operates on a clear order of priorities: American citizens first, then immigrant visas, and then non-immigrant visas at the bottom. So tourist visas, student visas, work visas, these all sit at the lowest priority level when a consulate shifts into emergency mode. Not because your case doesn't matter, but because that is the legal and operational hierarchy. Immigration attorneys and former consular officials warn that wait times for visa appointments will grow significantly as a result. Anyone with time-sensitive needs, whether a company, organization, or individual, should expect further delays and plan accordingly. Now, here is where we have to talk very clearly about who is actually affected and in what way, because there is a lot of confusion online right now, and some of it is creating unnecessary panic. Let's be direct and precise. If you are applying for a tourist visa, a student visa, an H-1B work visa, or other non-immigrant visas, the Strait of Hormuz crisis can affect you indirectly. It can disrupt your flight routes, it can close the consulate you were planning to interview at, it can delay your passport return, it can slow down processing timelines, but it does not automatically ban your visa by nationality because of this conflict. The bigger, more direct, and more serious policy issue for many applicants right now is a completely separate U.S. immigration decision, one that was made weeks before the first shot was ever fired in this conflict. And this is the part that most people are not fully understanding. On January 14, 2026, the U.S. Department of State announced an indefinite pause, effective January 21, 2026, in immigrant visa processing for nationals of 75 countries. This policy change affects only individuals applying for immigrant visas that lead to lawful permanent residence, meaning green cards, at U.S. embassies and consulates abroad. The pause will remain in effect until the State Department reassesses its procedures for determining whether applicants are likely to become financially dependent on the U.S. government. Pakistan is reported to be among the countries affected by this policy, confirmed across multiple legal sources, including immigration law firms and university international student offices, citing the State Department directive. Let that sink in for a moment. If you are a Pakistani national applying for a green card through a U.S. consulate, through a family petition, through a marriage-based case, through an employment-based petition, your immigrant visa case is currently paused with no clear timeline for resumption. The pause affects immigrant visa applicants regardless of their individual financial circumstances. Dual nationals applying with a valid passport from a country not on the list are exempt. The stated reason for the pause is that the State Department wants to reassess whether applicants from these countries are likely to become financially dependent on the U.S. government. The current suspension applies only to immigrant visas, such as family-based or employment-based petitions. Non-immigrant visas, such as tourist, business, student, and temporary work visas, are not impacted by this restriction. So let's be very clear about what this means in practical terms. You can still apply for a Tourist B visa to visit the United States. You can still apply for an F1 student visa. You can still apply for an H-1B. These are non-immigrant visas, and this particular pause does not affect them. But if you have a family member in the United States who has filed a petition for you, if you have an employer who has sponsored you for permanent residence, if you have been waiting years for your priority date to become current, and you were finally close to getting your green card, that process is currently paused with no announced end date. On February 2nd, 2026, a coalition of immigrant advocacy groups, along with U.S. citizens who have been separated from their spouses, children, and parents because of the pause, filed a federal lawsuit in New York challenging the freeze. The lawsuit argues that the Immigration and Nationality Act prohibits discrimination in issuing immigrant visas based on an individual's nationality, and that this policy violates that core statutory protection. So there is an active legal challenge in federal court right now. This is important to follow because if the court rules against the State Department, processing could potentially resume sooner than the government intends. But until a court orders otherwise, the pause remains in effect. Now let's talk about the two crises together, because this is where things get really complicated for people caught in the middle. Imagine you are a Pakistani national. Your spouse is a U.S. citizen and has filed a family petition for you. You were waiting on your immigrant visa interview at the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad or at a regional hub. The 75-country pause hit you on January 24th. You were already frozen. Then the Middle East crisis begins in late February. The regional consular network goes into disruption. Airlines reroute or suspend flights. Processing grinds further to a halt across multiple posts. And you are now dealing with two separate crises. One a policy decision, one a military conflict, stacking on top of each other. Or consider this scenario. You are already inside the United States on a valid non-immigrant visa, maybe an H-1B, maybe an F-1. You traveled to visit family. The regional flight network is disrupted. Getting back becomes difficult. Your authorized stay has a deadline. Every day the flights are uncertain is a day closer to a potential status problem. For F1, J1, H1B, L1, and similar visa seekers, although these categories are not banned by nationality, the infrastructure disruption means fewer appointment slots, slower processing, and greater overall uncertainty. And the disruptions are not limited to embassies that are physically in the conflict zone. When multiple embassies in a region are overwhelmed or operating at reduced capacity, applicants try to flow toward the ones that are still open, what is called third country processing. But that creates its own complications. Some visa seekers are getting appointments at consulates outside their home country where services continue, but they often need visas to travel to those third countries first, and the policy has not been applied consistently across posts. Every consulate has its own operational latitude. What works at one post may not work at another. So what should you actually do right now? First, know exactly which category your visa falls into. Are you applying for an immigrant visa, a green card, or a non-immigrant visa? These two categories are living in very different realities in 2026, and mixing them up causes confusion about what your options actually are. Second, if you are affected by the 75-country immigrant visa pause, continue attending your interview if it has been scheduled. Applications and interviews can still proceed, but no visa will be issued until the pause is lifted. So, staying active in the system, attending your interview, keeping your application current, all of this matters. Do not go silent on your case. Third, monitor the State Department website and your local U.S. Embassy website every single day. The situation is changing rapidly. A post that reduced services last week may announce a partial reopening. A new policy directive may emerge. You need to be watching official sources, not social media rumors. Fourth, if your application involves any connection to the Middle East region, either your documents are stuck there, or your sponsor or petitioner is there, or you were planning a third country interview there, contact a licensed immigration attorney to understand your specific options. Fifth, if you are inside the United States right now and worried about your visa status, do not wait. Talk to an immigration attorney before your status becomes a problem, not after. Sixth, if you have a sponsor, whether an employer or a university, communicate with them proactively. They may have resources, immigration staff, or contingency options that you don't know about yet. And seventh, take the federal lawsuit seriously as a source of potential change. The case currently before a New York federal court raises serious legal questions about whether the 75-country immigrant visa pause violates the Immigration and Nationality Act's prohibition on nationality-based discrimination. If the court agrees with the plaintiffs, this policy could be struck down or paused while litigation continues. Follow the legal developments carefully. Now let's step back and look at the bigger picture. Because the story of 2026 immigration is still being written, the Strait of Hormuz situation is active and evolving. Experts warn that even if the waterway fully reopens, disruptions to global supply chains will continue to be felt afterward. The real work of rebuilding normal operations begins after the immediate crisis ends. The same is true for the immigration system. When embassies eventually resume full operations, there will be a backlog unlike anything the system has handled in years. Months of frozen appointments, thousands of delayed interviews, staff that was redeployed to emergency operations. All of that has to clear before processing returns to normal. And normal was already slow before any of this happened. Trade and logistics analysts have noted that the current volatility may become a longer-term feature of global risk management, not just a short-term disruption. That is a sobering thought, because it means the world your visa application exists in has changed, not just for this month or this year. The calculus of international travel, global mobility, and immigration processing has shifted meaningfully in 2026. And yet, people are still getting visas. Embassies are still functioning in many countries. Interviews are still being scheduled. Cases are still being processed. The system has not collapsed. It is strained, it is slower, it is more complicated, but it is still moving. The most important thing you can do right now is stay informed with accurate information, not rumors on social media, not WhatsApp forwards that mix up tourist visa rules with green card policy, not dramatic claims that all visas are banned, because they are not. Not false reassurances that everything is fine, because for many families it is not. The reality is nuanced, and navigating a nuanced reality requires accurate information, careful planning, and patience. You are in this immigration journey for a reason, whether it is reuniting with your family, building a career, pursuing your education, or building a better future. That reason has not changed. The path has gotten harder, the timeline has stretched, the obstacles are real, but the destination is still there. The Strait of Hormuz may be disrupted. The immigrant visa system may be under unprecedented pressure. But the people who are going to come out of this crisis successfully are the ones who stayed informed, stayed organized, and kept moving forward. That is exactly what this channel is here to help you do. If this video gave you clarity on something you were confused about, hit the like button, because it helps this information reach the people who need it most. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because as this situation continues to develop, we will be right here with updated, verified, real information to help you navigate what comes next.